Hello all you hardcores out there, how are you doing? It's Russ here from Poker's Corner, biggest gob in sport. We're in Dewsbury at Julian's palatial fancy stone, Yorkshire stone gaff. How are you doing, Julian?
I'm alright, mate. I don't know about palatial, but
you're not in poorhouse, are you, kid?
I don't know about that, mate.
How are you?
I'm good, I'm good.
Right, let's dive straight in. Now that George has settled on garden. Right. It's like a bowling pitch, this grass, Julian. Mine's like a jungle. Mark Efron, yesterday. Was that a bad day at office for Mark Efron?
It didn't look...
Is he in carrying an injury?
It didn't look right. I mean, I watched the fight with Anna last night.
Jack Cully.
And as I was watching it, I just... A minute in, I thought, oh, it doesn't look that sharp. It doesn't look that focused. His body language wasn't great in the corner. And then in the second round, there were a couple of innocuous looking shots, and sometimes you see a fighter get hit with shots that they're not that big and they have a slight wobble, and you're like, there's something not great here. And what I also noticed was his coordination was off. You know, his hand-feet coordination was misaligned, so his hands were moving before his feet were moving, and I just thought it was a bit weird. And I'd be interested to know what's going on in the camp. You know, it's one thing looking decent, but I'm not making excuses. Great win for Jack, a really great win. But whilst it was a nicely timed punch that knocked him out or knocked him down, the shot before it, what wobbled him, was nothing of a shot. And I thought that was a worrying performance from Mark Efron right from the opening bell. And you know, no matter what you would have predicted last night, you wouldn't have predicted a 3-round win, would you? He looked out of sorts, and I always wonder about certain fighters who have kind of been around domestic level for a long time.
Do you think Mark Efron might have gone stale, do you think, hanging around that domestic scene too long?
It happens, that's exactly what I was just going to say. It happens, and people lose that impetus, to lose their enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And I'm just speculating, you know, he might have had the best camp he's ever had, and he might have got beat by a better fighter, but I wasn't convinced last night he got beat by a better fighter. And I think, you know, we'll talk about Smith and Eubank a little bit later on, but it's the same thing, isn't it? Sometimes you have a really bad night at the office, and sometimes things just don't gel and don't flow. And things were definitely not flowing last night right from the bell. Body language is everything, and I always talk about body language when I'm watching. I'm a nightmare to watch boxing with. I watched it with Anna last night, and I says, his body language is awful. His body language was terrible, and you could just see he wasn't feeling it.
Do you think sometimes fighters can get in the ring and they're just not in mode for it?
Honestly, that happens. I mean, I was only a club level amateur. I had 14 amateur fights, and there were nights when you're just warming up, I just felt great. I'm like, tonight's a good night, I'm feeling good. And then there were 2 or 3 other nights you're just flat, you're just not feeling it. And I always remember the first fight that Gary Sykes had with Johnny Case, and I was warming him up on the pads. Sykes was English champion. It was on the Khan Diaz undercard at Sheffield Arena, and I was warming him up, and he read my face, did Gary, and he just goes, "I'm a bit flat, Jules. You look a bit worried." He goes, "No, we'll warm into it, Gary. We'll warm into it." And I turned around to John and Bob Shannon. I went, I don't know, mistimed the peak. He wasn't feeling great, and it took Sykes that night about 2 or 3 rounds to really get into that fight with Case. Luckily, I had the beating of Case, and you know, but against anyone else that night, Sykes would have been in a lot of trouble. And it's, you know what? I can see with you sometimes when you do your videos, you're on fire, aren't you? Yeah. And the other days it's hard work, innit?
Yeah.
And boxing's no different. Life's no different. I have great days in the office, and I have days when I'm like, do you know what? This is just.
Do you think Mark Efron just had a bad day at office?
I think he had a bad day, but I also think it's a really hard fight to come back from.
Yeah, it weren't like it were a gimme fight for him, were it?
It was probably a 50-50, 55-45 fight. I would have had Efron as a slight favourite. I think the irony, I think he's a little bit heavy-handed and a little bit more physical than Cullen, but it was a lovely shot. But you know, I don't know. Did they get the tactics right? Did Joe get them wrong? Was Efron not at the races? You just don't know, do you? But the one thing I do like is I do like these domestic level fights. Even though I think Efron should have moved on with his career a bit more, I like to see these type of fights, and I thought it was a good fight to have on that bill.
Do you see any falling outs going? Because sometimes when a fighter gets beat, first they're angry, then they're upset, then they tend to look for somebody to blame. Do you think that'd happen with Joe and him?
Possibly. I don't know what the you
Yeah.
know what the camp's like. I don't know what the relationship's like. Because Joe will tell you there were some fighters you're naturally closer to than others, and there are other fighters. Certainly
Yeah.
when you do it for a living like Joe, whereas it's a business arrangement. I give you 100%, you give me 100%. But I don't know what the story is there. What I did sense was I sensed in the other corner with Michael Jennings and Jack. You could see there was more of a it was more fun in that corner. It was more of a bond, and they seemed tighter. And sometimes the coach bounces off the fighter bounces off the coach. And I don't know if that was the case or not with that fight. Like I said, you've got to speculate. But what I can tell you from experience is some camps are not great. Some camps go amazing and the performance isn't great. And some camps go not great and the performance is brilliant. It is about on the night. You do the work.
Yeah.
You got to tick the boxes and do the work. But he never flowed from the first round, did he?
No.
His hands were in front of his feet all the time, and his balance was wrong. His head up was over his front foot, and I thought, what's going on? And I almost wondered at some point.
If you were injured.
But I almost wondered at some point if he was thinking, I can just take you out with that body shot, because we know Cullen's been done a few times, a couple of times with body shots, and maybe there was a bit of overconfidence there. That I'll take my
Bit
time.
like a Froch Groves one.
Yeah, I'll take my time. I'll warm into it, and when I want to get you out there, I'll get you out of there. And all of a sudden, 2 rounds in, he's like, I'm really struggling with the range now. His range was all over the place.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that Mark Efron comes again. He's still young enough, and he was 31 now.
Yeah.
Adam Azim, he got a win.
I thought, whilst his opponent wasn't a puncher, again, 30 seconds in, I didn't know much about his opponent. 30 seconds in, I said, this is a good kid he's up against. Technically he was very, very good, very, very sharp. He had that kind of gazelle leaping left hook, kept catching Azim with. Azim was a little bit too, he didn't do enough work for the first 4 or 5 rounds for me, but he controlled the action and he finished strong. And you know what, you can never win, can you? Because when you get a guy like Adam Azim and he's knocking out nobodies for 3 years, right, people just get critical. And then last night I was thinking, this might be a little bit too much of a tough fight for him at this stage. Not that he'll get beat, but it might not look good. But ultimately, these are the tough 10 rounds I keep talking about with Anthony Joshua should have had.
Yeah.
So I don't think his last 2 10 rounds have done him any harm whatsoever. But what I do now in terms of matchmaking is I'd drop him down half a level again. A couple more blowouts, because he's a working pro, he's learning his trade. I still, and I say this every time, and people think I'm having to go to Shane McGuigan. I'm definitely not, for anyone defends Shane. But I always think there's that mid to close range element of Shane McGuigan's fighters that's missing. And Azim is really, really good when he's got that range and he sticks it on you and he uses that yardstick and he lets that backhand go and he's controlling from distance. I know he's a long limbed fighter, but up close, mid range, there's not a lot going on, bit of holding, bit messy, and I just think that'll work. But when you get a shorter guy, a stronger guy who does hold power, who walks you down, I would worry about
Like a
that.
John Ryder type.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll always say as well, and again I'm always consistent with this, and I've said this about Campbell Hatton, I've said this about Conor Benn, and I've said this about Adam Azim, and this is not suggesting they're all on the same level, because they're not. I think Azim's the most talented out of the bunch of those, but their opposition tends to be non-punchers. And when you get fighters who continue, even if they've got a great looking record, when you get fighters who continually fight non-punchers, that's a sign that you know there are problems with the chin on your fighter. You fight a non-puncher, we have a problem with the chin. You know, the guy last night who was in beat was a good fighter, good skills, but no power, zero power. And I'm thinking, sometimes what happens, and no one will ever admit to this, is your fighter's probably had a couple of counts in the amateurs, it's probably been dropped a couple of times in sparring, and you're worried about the durability. And I'm definitely sure that's the case with Campbell Hatton. I think Conor Benn's already shown his fragilities around the whiskers, hence fighting guys like Chris Algieri, who hadn't knocked anybody out for 100 years. And I think Adam Azim, I didn't know he was fighting. I knew he was fighting. They said he was capable, and I said last night to Anna, I says, I bet this guy's got a low knockout percentage. And of course, I read out the stats, and he'd only 5 KOs in 20 odd fights. And she says, how do you know that? And I says, because I think they've got concerns about Azim's durability.
That should have been easy to you, Julian, that question in front of your lass.
Yes,
I bet she was like, oh, Julian, you're right again. And you're like, oh, well, I know.
Like that. I genuinely didn't know his record. I knew they said he's capable. And I went, he'll have a low knockout percentage. And it's the same with Campbell Hatton.
Yeah.
Campbell Hatton won't fight anybody who's won 10, lost 10, but the 10 he's won have been by KO. You know, he's got a dig. He won't fight those guys. He'll fight someone who on the surface has got.
Well, everybody should be like that, up to 10-0, and then you've got to let the shackles off. Otherwise, you're just padding kids' careers out.
We knew early on Gary Sykes had got his chin tested. You know, he fought Dwayne Hill, who had a decent crack, but he fought Carl Allen. Carl Allen was a journeyman who could really bang. You know, and Sykes fought a few heavy hitters early on, and you know what? You can't hide the truth forever, and you got to let them off the lead at some point. But I want to know. I don't want my fighter getting hit unnecessarily, but I want to know if my fighter has got that durability. That's massively important, and I suspect I like Azim. I think he's brilliant. I suspect he won't have that durability.